Hello, I'm Deb Samuel, Diabetes Clinical Specialist with your Medtronic Diabetes family in Canada. Welcome to our second video in the CareLink support series, built to help you become prepared for your remote visits. In our first CareLink video, I walked you through how to upload your pump and how to generate reports. In this video, we're going to take a look at insulin pump reports only. And in our third video, we will look at reports pertaining to CGM and auto mode. Before we get started, I just want to indicate that, of course, these videos were created for information and education purposes only, so they are not at all intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or management. And so we would encourage you to always seek advice from your physician or other qualified healthcare team member with any questions you have pertaining to your medical condition. In this video, I'm going to review with you how to apply the Yes I Can framework that we discussed in the first video in the series. We're going to look at the Adherence and Logbook report, and I will orient you to those and also show you how to apply the CareLink three-step methodology, which is just a methodology that all of us healthcare professionals use to approach your reports. We're going to give you the inside scoop so that you can do that yourself as well. The three reports we're going to look at today are the Adherence report, the Logbook report, and I just want to remind you about your device settings report, which is there and present and updated each time you upload your pump. So you'll always have the most current settings if you are uploading at home routinely. Here's our Yes I Can framework, which was outlined for you in the first video. So briefly, we're always going to take that moment to acknowledge and celebrate all the positive things that are going well. This is a solution-focused framework, which is going to help you look at your diabetes from that standpoint as well. What have I done well? What is working for me? And how can I do more of it to ensure even better outcomes? And all the outcomes that are important to you beyond just the numbers and your A1C. Then we're going to take a moment to think about things we might want to better understand, concerns we're seeing, patterns we've identified, things that we want to appreciate better in order to relate better to our diabetes. So those fall under the issues, and they can be behaviors or having to do with hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia. And then if you come prepared to your remote visit, your healthcare team can help you to determine the causes and potential course of action. So this is our adherence report, and the reason we want to look at this report first is it shows what you've been doing with your insulin pump. And once we know that the technology has been used properly, we can feel fairly confident looking at the subsequent reports and knowing that whatever patterns we're seeing that might need a change in the setting or course of action are not necessarily just due to behaviors that might be causing any pattern that we are seeing. So you can see on the left-hand side of the report here, each day is identified by day of the week and date. And then we are offered monitoring information. The monitoring information indicates first how many times a day you have been testing. And here we don't see any sensor use because we're looking at pump use only. Now you can see how many tests a day have occurred, and we know that best practice is 3 to 4 tests a day. Most of you will be testing more often than that. Next, we are offered information about bolus, wizard use, and so you can see here that first it would be identified if any manual boluses were occurring. In this case, none are. Then it identifies how many times per day the bolus wizard has been used, how many of those are with food, how many involve a correction dose, and how many times the bolus wizard recommended dose was overridden. Overrides should not be looked at as good or bad. There are many appropriate reasons to override the recommended dose. We just want to understand when and why those overrides are occurring so that we can proceed. Next, we are offered rewind and set information. So you can see here on which days the pump has been rewound and how many times. We are offered the cannula fill information, including the amount that each cannula fill has involved. So in this case, 0.3. We are offered how many times the tubing fills occur and the amount of insulin used to fill the tubing. Lastly, we're offered suspend duration information, and this is a total amount of minutes or hours the pump has been suspended on any given day. Best practice would not be to ever be disconnected from your pump and not receiving basal insulin for more than 1 or 2 hours, and this should be something you discuss with your healthcare provider if you're seeing suspend durations that are longer than that. Lastly, if this all seems a little bit overwhelming to begin with, you can actually just look across the bottom row for summary and averages of all of these event information pieces, and that would get you a good start with this report. So let's walk you through a live one. So of course, we're always going to apply our Yes, I Can framework and identify all the positives that we are seeing here first. So lots and lots of testing. We're very pleased with that. Using the bolus wizard and overriding, since there's only one, it's generally with purpose. Changing of infusion sets is occurring on time every 2 to 3 days. And each of the components of rewind and set information is all present. And then there's minimal suspending. Then we would go on to, although I don't like the word issue, I prefer to think a bit about it as things you might want to better understand. And so these things might include that at the bottom row, in the summary row, you can see that 57% of the boluses include a correction dose. Sometimes this can tell us that we're coming into meals on the higher side or above range. We might like to adjust the basal insulin in the background to address that. There are some suspends lasting 1 to 2 hours, and so it's not that that is good or bad. Again, we just want to understand when and why those longer suspend durations occur to ensure that if there's a better strategy that we can employ to help you out, then we would want to do that so it's less work for you. And then, of course, just understanding the purpose of overriding will also help us help you. If there's something we can do or put in place so that you don't have to override, then we would want to do that. This is our second report for pump information, and it's the logbook report. So it should be fairly familiar to you, but there are a few things that I think are worth pointing out. So again, down the left-hand side of the page, you are issued the day of the week and the date. Each day goes right across the page. So you can see this Friday here, we go from midnight until midnight, followed by some statistical information about your average BG, your intake of carbohydrates, and your insulin based on total insulin and how much of that is represented by your bolus amounts. If I can draw your attention to this segment here, this shows us bolus wizard use. So you can see here, the blood sugar is entered as 10.7 and it's highlighted in gold, as would be all blood sugars represented as above range. And so this is something you can adjust in your preferences, but the default would be 3.9 to 10. Anything higher than 10 would be highlighted in gold. Anything lower than 3.9 would be highlighted in red. Then you can see that this person entered 49 grams of carbohydrate and they received a total bolus dose of 4.3 units. This 4.3 units has a circle around it, and I'll just refer you to the legend at the bottom of the page, which indicates that it was either a manual bolus, in this case we know it was not, or a bolus dose that included a correction amount. This third icon here, the squiggly line, represents a skipped meal. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there should have been a meal. It just represents that under the meal bucket time frame, you can see these outlined at the top as overnight, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And again, these can be customized in your preferences. The squiggly line indicates that there was no bolus given during that meal bucket period on that specific day. When I say meal bucket, I mean these along the top here. So here you can see the breakfast meal bucket is outlined as roughly 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And again, you can customize these to better reflect your day under your preferences. And lastly, down here you can see another bolus wizard event that was for correction only. You can see that because you have a blood sugar entered and a dose received, but no carb entry. And so our CareLink 3-step methodology is how we all approach your reports when we're looking at them. And so the first step in the methodology is to look at the overnight period. We look at the overnight period first because it's one of the most easy time frames to get stable, because a lot of the variables affecting your blood sugar aren't present. We're generally not eating when we're sleeping, we're not exercising, we're not stressed. And so this could be a full third of your day that if we can get that in range, that will have a huge impact on your A1C. But we also know that when you start your day in range, the rest of your day follows better. And so when we look at the overnight period, we're basically looking for a pattern of lows or a pattern of highs. We look for lows first because that's when you're most at risk or most vulnerable. And so we definitely want to ensure that you're not having hypoglycemia, and we would want to address that right away. But the questions we ask, whether we're looking for a pattern of lows or highs, are the same. We would consider talking to a healthcare provider about reducing our overnight basal rates, for instance, if we were having any lows throughout the night. Was too much insulin given for a bedtime snack, for instance? Or did you exercise later in the day or in the evening hours, and that might be the cause for some lows you were having? And likewise with any patterns of highs seen. Then step 2 would be to look at our pre-meal periods. So how are we coming into our meals? Are we in range, above range, or below? And again, we would be looking to see first a pattern of lows. That would put you at risk, so we would want to deal with that first. And then a pattern of highs. And lastly, if we get to the place where we've addressed the overnight and the pre-meal period, we would want to do the same for our post-meal period. So what's happening after our meals and how well are our carb ratios working? So again, we look for a pattern of lows first, and then to see if there are a pattern of highs. And we ask questions about carb counting. Is insulin given at the right time prior to the meal? Does your carb ratio need adjusting for either highs or lows? Or do we want to take a look at meal choices and consider using a dual or square wave bolus? Now, each of these steps would not likely be done all at the same time. Sometimes it can take several weeks of addressing the overnight first, and then we would look at the pre-meals. So it's not intended that you would look at the same set of reports necessarily for all 3 of these steps. You might find enough change that needs to happen with just step 1. And once you have step 1 managed, then you can move on to step 2 or 3. We're going to look at a real live report and do all 3 steps, but it would never be the expectation that you would do this all at one sitting. So of course, we're going to embed our Yes I Can framework within the methodology and always identify the positives first. And on this report, there are so many positives to point out. There's lots and lots of testing, so we get a really good idea of everything that's been going on. Very few lows. You can see there's only one highlighted red, 3.6. Our fasting BGs are most of the time in range, which sets our day off well. There's lots of information being entered into the pump in terms of carbs and bolus doses and BGs, so lots to celebrate there. And our site changes are generally on schedule, and so we can feel fairly confident that any pattern of highs we are seeing are not simply because we need to change our infusion set more often. And once we look a little bit closer and we've identified the positives, then we want to apply our three-step methodology. So we're going to look at the overnight first. And what we do is we split the overnight into 3 areas. So there's bedtime, mid-sleep, and mid-sleep to wake up. And we would want to assess each of these periods to understand what has been going on and if anything needs to be changed. So of course, our positives include that there are lots of tests at bedtime, which really give us a frame for where this person is going to sleep and how they are waking up. Corrections have also been given at bedtime when needed, and our fasting BGs are in range, so this is lots to celebrate. If there's anything we might want to better understand, it would be that here you can see there are several of the bedtime BGs that remain above range going to bed. And so we might want to understand why that is. If we wanted to understand, if and only if we wanted to understand what is happening throughout the night, your healthcare provider might ask you to do several overnight mid-sleep tests so that we could determine, are you spending the majority of the night where you're waking up in range, or is it taking some time for those bedtime BGs to come into range? And is there improvement that can be done there? But that would be really fine-tuning. Once we've addressed the overnight and we know that you're safe throughout the night and coming into the morning in range, we would look at the pre-meal periods. And again, we want to look at prior to breakfast, prior to lunch, and prior to dinner. So you can see why you would probably not be doing all of this at one sitting. So our first is to identify all of the positives, which include all of the testing and information that has been provided here. And this person is using the bolus wizard, so we get to see everything that was done with the pump. Then there might be some things we might want to understand. Like, for instance, some of the pre-lunch gold highlighted highs when this person is high after breakfast. So we would kind of want to know, is it a carb ratio issue or is it a basal issue? We may want some more info about the impact of particular breakfast foods, because clearly in some instances, everything is perfectly fine, but after some breakfast meals, this person is a little bit on the higher side. So we might want to look at what are the different foods and are they having an impact on those different days. And then we might just be curious about that one low that we see, but since it's only one, it doesn't really make a pattern, and we might just want to understand what happened on that day in case it gives us a chance to avoid one single low. And then we do the same thing with the post-meal period. So here you can see after breakfast, after lunch, and the after dinner period. We're always going to do our positives first. So lots to look at here, including the fact that the carb ratios seem to be working and that most correction doses, when needed, are working. The things we want to better understand are that there are some highs post-breakfast and dinner. We might want to figure out why that is to improve things for you. And we may want more information about specific food choices because the pattern isn't present after every meal. Again, I just want to point to the device settings report and remind you that it is updated every time you upload your pump so that you will always have a close reference to your most current settings should you ever need them. Here you'll see your basal rates, and if you have more than one pattern, they would be presented for you. all of your bolus wizard information, and any of the settings that you've programmed into your pump would be present on this report. Now, if we put it all together and we take it through our Yes, I Can framework, all of the positives that we've identified throughout assessing your reports would be here. And some of the things you want to better understand are also presented. If you came to your remote appointment with just those 2 columns completed, your healthcare team is going to be excited to help you find the cause and put together a plan of action. I just want to take a moment to thank you for your time today, and I hope this will help you be well prepared for your next remote appointment with your team. Take good care.